Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time when powdered wigs were tall. Morals were flexible, and parrots were the most have accessory in Georgian London. Picture this, the year is 1783. The streets smell faintly of coal smoke, damp wool, and ambition. Carriage clatter over cobblestone slick with rain. And on the velvet gloved hand of a duchess stepping out of her sedan chair? A squawking, feathered diva wearing a miniature hat. Yes, a hat. You find yourself wandering through a London square. The city buzz with scandal, powdered faces, and the rustle of silks. But all anyone seems to be whispering about, aside from who's having an affair with whom, is parrots. Brilliant, talkative, rainbow-feathered parrots, tear-tucked into coat pockets, perched on brocade curtains, and even strutting along dinner tables with tiny silver bells tied to their feet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what you do here. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I'm genuinely curious. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle past the tea shops and book peddlers and end up in front of a parlor window. There, on a gilded perch, is a blue and yellow macaw named Hercules. He blinks at you, then screeches. You relate, darling, to no one in particular. The lady of the house giggles behind her fan. You blink. Did that bird just sass you? In Georgian London, parrots aren't just talking birds. They're social commentators, relationship wreckers, and sometimes, odd little celebrities in their own right. These birds have been carried in from the far corners of empire, from the West Indies, the Amazon, the Gold Coast, and plopped down onto doilies in Mayfair. Owning one is the equivalent of driving a Lamborghini down a one-way cobbled street, completely impractical and designed solely to make everyone else feel deeply inferior. Historians still argue whether the parrot craze began with naval officers showing off tropical birds, or whether it trickled in through aristocratic households who saw them in colonial outposts and just had to have one. Either way, by the mid-1700 siglo, a parrot on your shoulder was the Georgian version of going viral. You step into a well-appointed home, the kind with 12 clocks, a grandfather asleep in the library, and a parrot squawking the latest stock prices. The host greets you, he's wearing breeches and a waistcoat that could double as upholstery. You're handed a sherry, and before you can sip it, the parrot yells, "More brandy, Charles." You, reborn sober. Charles turns pink. The parrot is clearly a family member. Now, don't assume these birds were kept only for their colors. No. The real allure was their speech. A parrot that could greet guests, recite verses from the rape of the lock, or imitate your mother-in-law's disapproving sniff was priceless. And if it told secrets? Even better. Because in an age of gossip pamphlets and scandal sheets, what's more delicious than a bird that airs out your dirty laundry while you're pouring tea? Of course, not everyone approved. Some clergymen warned that parrots might imitate swear words or unholy phrases. One pamphlet even asked whether a talking parrot could technically be possessed. Spoiler, the church never reached a consensus. Meanwhile, etiquette guides began including polite ways to discipline one's parrot. A stern look, a gentle scolding. In some more zealous households, a tiny curtain was drawn across the bird cage when company arrived, like putting a mouthy child in timeout. Still, parrots remained resiliently popular. Georgian London was a city obsessed with novelty and ostentation. Owning a living creature that could mimic your voice? That was magic. And like all things magical, it came with a bit of chaos. Case in point, you hear the story of a barrister whose parrot disrupted an entire court proceeding by shouting, "Guilty," every time a witness spoke. The judge had to excuse the man and his bird until they agreed to remain silent. You pass a row of street vendors, and there among the pies, pins, and boot polish sits a grubby man with two parrots balanced on his shoulders. Lovely birds. Go, says, winking. Both of them know your name. You hesitate. My name? One parrot blinks, then says, clearly and with great disdain, "You smell like a potato." It's unclear if this is meant as an insult or a sale speech. You keep walking. There's something delightful, and mildly unhinged, about this whole affair. In a society rigid with manners and propriety, the parrot is a glitch in the system. It's loud, it's messy, it mocks your guests, it calls the vicar fancy pants. It pecks at lace cuffs and its macarons off the tea tray. It is, in short, alive, in a world that often prefers things be powdered, polished, and very, very dead. And so, as the fog rolls in and the lamplighters make their rounds, you pause in front of one more house. From the upstairs window, you hear a shrill voice shouting, "No, not him again." You look up. A bird? A lover? Hard to say. The curtains rustle. The mystery remains unsolved. But one thing is clear, in Georgian London, the most fashionable voice in the room often belongs to someone with feathers. You wake up, not in your own bed, but on a velvet chair in the corner of Lady Hester Darnley's dressing room. Don't ask how you got here. There's no time, because her parrot, a haughty African grey named Cicero, is squawking at a wig stand like it insulted his mother. Lady Hester glides in, dressed in a silk robe stitched with metallic thread and tiny embroidered lemons. She doesn't acknowledge you, but she does address Cicero. "What do we think of this one?" she asks, turning to model an absurdly tall powdered wig topped with fog grapes. Cicero leans forward, bobs his head dramatically, and declares, "You look like a fruit basket, madame." Lady Hester beams. "Perfect. This, you realize, is not just pet ownership, it's a fashion partnership. In Georgian London, a parrot wasn't complete without accessories. People ordered custom perches that matched their drapes. Some birds wore tiny velvet collars with gold thread. One apocryphal tale tells of a green parakeet named Sir Whistleton who attended an opera in a miniature tricorn hat. Historians still argue whether that detail is an exaggeration, but a surviving sketch does, in fact, feature a parrot in formal wear. The bird was not merely a creature in the home, it was an extension of your style. You know how some people today match their dogs to their handbags? The same principle applied, except with feathers and a great deal more to ye. You pass by a seamstress shop and spot a canary yellow cockatoo being fitted for a neck ruff. The tailor, with pink cushions strapped to both wrists, mutters to herself, "A bite's less than the Duke." Inside, a lady is selecting thread colors that match the bird's tail. Peach, plum, peacock blue. The new parrot palette is in vogue. As you step back onto the street, the smell of roast chestnuts and damp wool wraps around you. A woman sweeps past in a pink muslin dress, her parrot nestled in a sling against her chest. It cheers in time with her footsteps. This isn't rare, it's expected. In fact, there's a mild social embarrassment attached to not having a parrot. A certain cousin of the Earl of Aylesford was reportedly snubbed at a ball because she brought, a cat. Polite society didn't just tolerate parrots. It catered to them. Fashion magazines of the day began publishing inserts titled things like Feathered Friends and Finery or The Polite Lady's Parrot Companion. This included advice such as, "Never wear scarlet near a green bird, lest you appear vulgar," or, "If your parrot matches your upholstery, ensure it is by design and not accident." You duck into a milliner's shop, where a pair of green parakeets are perched on hat stands, fluffing their feathers in approval, or disdain, as women try on plumed bonnets. One squawks, "Try the mauve, try the mauve," and the girl obeys, delighted. The hat does look better. Some shopkeepers took the trend further, training their parrots to interact with customers. One notorious bonnet seller had a parrot that chirped, "You look fat in that," only to women she didn't like. No one dared argue with a bird. But not everyone was thrilled about fashion's new feathered face. Some worried it was a symptom of decadence. That London was becoming a place where birds were dressed better than bakers. One pamphlet warned, "Wilt are birds preen in Parisian silk. Are cowboys freeze." Social satire was always close behind. Still, the fascination grew. You find yourself at a modest country estate, where a new bride is introduced to society. Her gown is simple but elegant. Her gloves, embroidered with vines. But what draws every eye in the drawing room? The crimson parrot perched on her shoulder, its talons wrapped in a silk ribbon. The guests murmur, not about the bride's smile or the punch, but whether the bird's red clashes with the sash on her dress. Some fashion houses began consulting bird behaviorists when selecting fabrics. If your parrot didn't like the texture, color, or rustling sound of your gown, it could ruin your entrance with a screech, or worse, a relieved poop. Yes, fashion has always come at a cost. Parrots even influenced perfume. Scent makers began developing fragrances friendly to birds, using ingredients that wouldn't cause them to molt or, heaven forbid, lose their ability to speak. Lavender and rose were in. Cinnamon. Anathema. You pass a perfumery where a grey parrot whistles the opening notes of a Mozart sonata. Then sneezes delicately at a bottle of jasmine water. The shop girl rushes to remove it from display. You're beginning to suspect the birds have more power than the humans. And yet, despite the absurdity, there's something oddly charming about it all. In an age obsessed with symmetry and formality, parrots add a splash of wild unpredictability. They can't be tamed entirely. They molt when they feel like it. They bite their loves. They repeat that embarrassing thing you said last week about Lord Willoughby's wig resembling a cheese soufflé. Dear, honest. There's one final stop this evening, a masquerade ball at a townhouse glittering with candlelight and chatter. Everyone's in costume. You wear something borrowed and itchy. But across the room, there's a woman in an emerald gown whose parrot is also masked, its tiny black domino resting just above its beak. The two of them curtsy in unison. Somewhere nearby, someone's bird reacts. Scandal. Without context. And just like that, conversation shifts. You may be wearing silk and diamonds. But if your parrot isn't pulling its weight, social death. You're suddenly seasick. The polished parquet floors and delicate chandeliers are gone, replaced by the rolling deck of a wooden ship slicing through choppy waves. Wind lashes your cheeks. Salt clings to your coat. And above you, rigging creaks as sailors climb like spiders into the sails, barefoot. Laughing. Cursing. The year is 1764, and you're aboard the Sugar Rose, a merchant vessel returning from the Caribbean. Somewhere between crates of tobacco and barrels of rum, there are parrots, dozens of them. Caged, squawking, hidden in laundry hampers, stuffed into coat sleeves. One brave sailor even tucked his favorite under his tricorne hat, pretending it was a rather animated feather. You might think, surely that's unsanitary, and you'd be right. But these men know the truth. Parrots are profit. Londoners will pay handsomely for a bird that speaks broken English or sings a few bars of a sea shanty. These sailors aren't just bringing home exotic souvenirs, they're smuggling in miniature fortunes. Historians still argue whether this avian smuggling was organized or just individual opportunism. Some accounts suggest entire shipping logs were altered to hide the number of birds on board. One captain reportedly docked with 20 declared songbirds. Though witnesses saw the ship echoed with screams of "Hello, Gorgeous," and "Drink up, sailor," in distinctly unsongbird tones. Down below deck, the hold smells like wet wood, bananas, and feathers. You pass rows of crates packed with produce, and between two casks of molasses. A parrot blinks at you from behind a curtain of sackcloth. Save me, it croaks, which is either excellent training or a bad sign. You offer a crumb of ship's biscuit. The bird looks deeply unimpressed. Fair trade routes during the Georgian era were long and profitable. And parrots made excellent commodities. They didn't spoil, like fruit. They didn't rot, like meat. And unlike other exotic animals, say, a monkey or a civet, they didn't require elaborate cages or careful feeding. Give a parrot hardtack, water, and a bored sailor to talk to, and it'll disembark multilingual. You find yourself standing beside a naval quartermaster making notes in a ledger. Size. We lost 3 barrels of sugar in a storm. But the damn grey parrot? Still alive. Won't shut up about Eleanor's ankles. Whatever that means. Apparently, that's a running joke on board. As you walk the deck, you realize the parrots have learned the sailor's language. Not just the words, but the tone. There's a green Amazon muttering obscenities in perfect Cornish accent. A macaw whistles a shanty with the pitch accuracy of a cathedral chorboy. One even mimics the boatswain's call so perfectly that it accidentally triggered a drill. You crouch near a pair of young deckhands feeding a parrot bits of apple. It talks more than the captain. One mutters. The parrot blinks. You're not wrong. It replies. Awkward silence follows. Of course, parrots weren't just luxury goods for the upper class. On board, they were entertainment, companions. The only creatures who wouldn't report you for talking in your sleep or crying over a letter from home. They were, in their own ridiculous, feathered way, crew members. And yet, not everyone adored them. One grim-faced purser calls them, noisy vermin. It tried 11, just 11, to toss one overboard for a screeching act during a storm. The bird clung to his sleeve, bit his nose, and yelled, murder, until someone rescued it. The crew took the parrot's side. Eventually, the ship makes port in London. Dog hands unload crates. Merchants bark prices. A parrot cries, I'm rich. From someone's shoulder, and honestly, it might be. You follow a sailor as he navigates customs. Officially, he's carrying textiles and dried fruit. Unofficially, he's got a parrot tucked into his overcoat that keeps whispering, nice boots, love. The customs officer raises an eyebrow. The sailor shrugs. Just a noisy throat. He's let through. The parrot winks at you. Once off the ship, birds are sold to dealers, who then offer them to the wealthy. But a few sailors choose to keep theirs. One veteran, missing 2 fingers and most of his teeth, cradles a tiny green parrot in his hand. She kept me sane on the water. Murmurs. Called me a pretty boy when no one else would. The bird pecks his beard affectionately. You feel like intruding would be rude. You wander the docks, where a chaotic pet market has formed. It's part circus, part chaos, part high society tinder. Ladies in bonnets inspect cajes. Gentlemen haggle over colors. One elderly widow interrogates a parrot with, can you recite psalms? The bird responds by squawking, God save the queen, and then breaking into a Baudelaire tune. She buys it instantly. Next to the parrots, pineapples are also being auctioned. You realize that both the fruit and the bird are signs of empire, impossible. Fragrant, foreign things that say, look at me, I can afford nonsense. A pineapple costs more than a chambermaid's yearly wage. A talking parrot? Even more. A street vendor calls out, parrots, polite and rude, choose your flavor. A holds up 2 birds. One prays and says, lovely weather. The other growls, get stuffed. A woman buys both. Of course she does. And just as you're about to leave, you see a tiny cage covered with a lace curtain. A voice inside says, don't tell him, Margaret. You freeze. Who's Margaret? What doesn't she want told? You lean closer. The parrot hisses, not you again. You step back. London's about to get very loud. You're standing in Covent Garden. And it's a mess of market stalls, muddy M's, and barking hawkers. The smell is a strangely addictive blend of rosewater, horse dung, cinnamon pastries, and the unmistakable must of parrot feathers. It's barely past dawn, but already a crowd has gathered around a man with a wicker cage on a cart. Shouting, a real beauty, recites Byron, insults your rivals. Don't be SHY. Madame. Inside the cage, a red parrot with a smug tilt to its head and the proud air of someone who's memorized their own price tag. You edge closer. Polly wants a profit. The seller mutters with a wink, adjusting his waistcoat, and the aim to provide. That's no joke. In Georgian London, parrots could cost more than your annual rent, sometimes even more than your servant's entire salary for a year. They were auctioned off in public squares and posh parlors alike. With flamboyant flair, bidding wars erupted over parrots that could sing opera or recite Horace. The wealthy saw them as the ultimate living ornament. And the sellers? They knew a sucker with a full purse when they saw one. You sidle up to a stall where a merchant lists his bird's talents, mimics the door knocker, laughs convincingly, says, I love you, with perfect sincerity, and allegedly whispered, traitor, at a passing politician once. The parrot prays and says, buy me, coward. You nearly do. Historians still debate whether these birds actually fetched the astronomical prices recorded in personal letters and diaries, some of which climb 10 to 15 guineas for a particularly eloquent gray. But what's beyond dispute is that parrots were a booming trade, and dealers made their fortunes by training birds to behave like miniature celebrities. And like celebrities, some parrots became famous. You pass a cafe where a man sips chocolate beside a parrot perched on a miniature throne. A small crowd gathers as the bird sings the first few bars of God Save the King, pauses dramatically, and then yells, boring. The man grins. He's available for parties. It isn't just private collectors anymore. Theaters want parrots for novelty acts. Fancy tailors use them to draw crowds to shop windows. One enterprising bookseller trains a cockatoo to shout, read more, you dolt, at pedestrians, which proves surprisingly effective for sales. But the best sellers are always the talkers. There's a makeshift podium where a parrot is being auctioned like a piece of fine silver. Quotes Hamlet, the auctioneer declares, is it to be or not to be right as I spilled tea on myself this morning? Coincidence? I think not. The bird screeches, alas. Poor Yorick. Shut the door. The bidding war begins. And if you think this is just rich people with too much time, think again. The middle class is obsessed too. They may not afford a talking Amazon, But till settle for a lovebird that whistles or a bogie with a half-memorized prayer. Even the working poor dream of parrots. In one letter, a housemaid guesses about a neighbor's bird who says, "Good morning, Agnes," and claims it makes her entire day. The bird's name, tragically, is Fred. Agnes has never been the same. You wander past a print shop, and through the window you see caricatures of parrots dressed in wigs and robes, passing judgment on other pets. One image shows a parrot in a powdered wig yelling, "Objection," while a pug cowers in the corner. The caption reads, "Lord Featherstone's parrot presides in court again." Londoners love a visual gag. And of course, parrots are everywhere in gossip. You overhear two women whispering behind fans. Lady Langley's parrot shouted a more Jean. Eliza in front of the bishop. Gasps. Laughter. Jealous glances. You can't help but imagine the scene. Tea spilled. Monocles dropped. Eliza red as her own pomegranate earrings. But it's not just about status. These birds, in their odd, colorful way, become emotional companions. One widow you meet on the edge of the square clutches her green parrot claws. Says goodnight, darling, just like my Albert did. She wipes a tear, and the parrot nuzzles her ear. Also calls me a snoring goose. She added s, and laughs softly. Of course, not every buyer is responsible. You pass a rowdy gentleman trying to teach his new parrot to shout football chants. The parrot has learned precisely one phrase, boo, which it uses liberally at pigeons, people, and its own reflection. And then there's the unfortunate man you spot chasing a loose macaw through the fruit stalls. She says shouts, as the bird throws grapes at a baker. You take shelter beside a seed vendor. She nods toward the chaos. They always forget, parrots choose you, not the other way around. You reflect on that. London is teeming with noise and ambition. And amid it all, parrots are selling like hotcakes. Or hotter. Really, no one's paying 10 guineas for a crumpet. It's a city where squawking becomes currency. And mimicry might just get you an invitation to tea. You pass a handbill nailed to a post, "Wanted, a gentleman's companion parrot. Must be literate and discreet. Inquire within." Below, someone has scrolled, "Good luck with that. Use not." The parrot on your borrowed shoulder leans in, as if to whisper a secret. Instead, it yells, "That's my best." You don't argue. You duck into the warmth of a grand townhouse just as a gust of wind sends someone's hat cartwheeling down the street. The butler barely glances at you, he's too busy balancing a silver tray while a cockatoo perched on his shoulder gnaws gently at his cravat. Welcome to dinner. This isn't just any dinner party, it's the event of the week. Hosted by Sir Benedict Whitlaw, a man whose powdered wig is rumored to contain more starch than his entire pantry. You're ushered through a hall lined with portraits, none of which feature humans alone. Each canvas includes a parrot or parrot-shaped accessory. One man poses nobly beside a feathered friend wearing a monocle. Yes, a monocle. You are not prepared. The dining room is ablaze with candlelight. Glittering chandeliers sway gently overhead. Silver forks glint beside porcelain plates. The centerpiece is a monstrous tear-red pyramid of candied fruits. And in its midst, strutting proudly among the peers, is a blue parrot wearing lace ankle cuffs and a pearl necklace. It pecks a cherry and says, "Who invited her?" Someone calls nervously. Historians still argue whether parrots were truly allowed to roam such prestigious tables during Georgian feasts, or if these were rare, eccentric cases among the ultra-rich, but letters and diaries from the period certainly suggest it happened more than once. And whether it's fact, embellishment, or hopeful imagination, one thing's clear, people wanted it to be true. They loved the idea of a bird bold enough to insult a duchess before the soup course. You're seated between a merchant with wine-stained cuffs and a viscountess with a voice like satin and opinions like daggers. Across from you, Sir Benedict lifts a goblet and declares, "To our noble companions." The guests raise their glasses. The parrot reacts, "Cheers, you scoundrels," and promptly dunks a raspberry into someone's wine. Laughter erupts. The meal begins: turtle soup, roasted pheasant, and a baked fig pudding so rich it might file taxes independently. Throughout it all, the parrot meanders along the table, taste testing from plates with no concern for decorum. It sidles up to you, blinks one eye, and says, "You need more gravy." You obey. Of course, not every parrot is allowed such freedom. Some are seated in ornate cages beside their owners, where they serve as color commentary for the evening. One bird repeats everything its mistress says. Half a second later, in a lower register, another mimics the sound of forks clinking and moves chewing, creating a very strange ASMR loop beside the roast beef. But some birds go further. A bright green macaw perches near the head of the table and recites Shakespeare between courses. A dish fit for the gods. It crows as the pheasant is served. Then, what light through yonder window breaks? As someone drops a bread roll. The parrot gets a round of applause. You catch wind of a story being passed along the table. About a dinner party in Chelsea where the host's parrot shouted, "Liar, liar," every time a certain nobleman spoke. The nobleman sued. The parrot won public affection. The nobleman left for bad. It's all gloriously absurd. And yet, underneath the spectacle, there's a thread of something deeper. These birds, unpredictable as they are, bring vitality into rooms otherwise locked in etiquette. Georgian dining customs are strict. Sit upright. Eat silently. Speak only in designated conversational voices. But parrots? They don't care. They interrupt. They sneeze during toasts. They scream, scandal, when someone knocks over a gravy boat. They are, in effect, living social detonators. At your table, the Viscountess leans in and whispers. That bird once said my corset squeaked. I've never worn whalebone since. Her tone is serious. The parrot, overhearing, mutters, squeak squeak squeak. Just under its breath. You're halfway through dessert, a glistening pyramid of candied oranges, when a footman appears carrying a velvet cushion. Atop it, another parrot. This one pure white, with a pink bow on its leg and a small scroll tucked beneath one wing. The host claps his hands. Time for the evening's entertainment. The bird unfolds the scroll with its beak. A butler clears his throat and reads the contents aloud. A cheeky poem composed by the parrot itself, well, likely dictated, but no one cares. It includes rhymes about wigs, scandal, and someone's overcooked ambitions. Guests are delighted. Someone weeps with joy. Another bird mimics the crying. This kind of show is increasingly fashionable. Some households hire tutors, not for their children, but for their parrots. Educators charge by the phrase. 10 shillings per sonnet. One ad reads, 20 if you want it recited with flair. One tutor claims her star pupil, a Senegal parrot, can quote Voltaire and Handel's Messiah. The claim has yet to be verified. But the waiting list to buy Herbert stretches to next spring. As the evening winds down, port is passed, cheeks are flushed, and the parrot, now sitting comfortably in a silver serving dish, whispers, "Take me home with you." You hesitate. Was that meant for you? Or is this bird just working every table in the room? You leave the party humming the tune it sang just before dessert. It's stuck in your head. You're not the only one. As you walk out into the cool night air, a gentleman ahead of you hums the same line. Behind you, a woman whistles it once. Then twice. The bird wrote a hit. You awake somewhere between the wafting scent of overripe pears and an echoing squawk of, "Where's my wig?" It's not your home, and it's not your dream, but a brightly wallpapered drawing room in Marylebone. And you're sitting in the midst of what can only be described as a parrot salon. No, not a place where birds get their feathers curled, although, honestly, that wouldn't be surprising, but a proper Georgian social club. With people, and parrots, and powdered noses. Welcome to the Squawk Society. It's an unofficial name, of course, but the members? Deadly serious. Dozens of ladies and gentlemen gather every Tuesday for tea, gossip, and the latest parrot recitations. The birds, perched along velvet stands and embroidered shoulder pads, chatter, whistle, and occasionally shriek. I saw you in the pantry. One lady faints. At the head of the room, a rather rotund gentleman claps his hands. Today's theme, he announces, is dramatic soliloquies. Gaspese and excited flutters ripple through the air. One parrot stretches its wings like a stage curtain being drawn. A green parakeet, no bigger than a teacup, recites, "Oh Romeo, Romeo," and then adds, "Where's my biscuit?" Fool. The audience erupt in polite laughter. It sounds absurd, but it's par for the course in Georgian high society. Parrot ownership has become so widespread among the upper classes that they've formed clubs, real or imagined, around their birds. Owning a parrot is no longer enough. It must be exceptional, clever, witty, socially adept. You wander through the room, taking in the tapestry of behavior, parrots perched on hat stands. One in a gilded cage shaped like a miniature ballroom. A woman feeds her bird sugar-red almonds from a silver thimble. Another is arguing with hers about who ruined her embroidery. Spoiler, the parrot is winning. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were common practice or simply a few eccentric households documented with enough flair to make the rest of us believe it. But between diary entries, satirical prints, and a letter from a duchess that describes a circle of green-voiced acquaintances, it's clear that something like this did happen. And often enough to make society take notice. You eavesdrop on a gentleman declaring that his parrot, Cecily, once warned him about his tailor's bankruptcy 3 weeks before the scandal broke. He should have listened. S says mournfully, Cecily mutters, told you so, without breaking eye contact. In another corner, two ladies whisper conspiratorially while their parrots silently mimic their expressions. One tilts its head at a cruel angle. The other frowns and clicks its beak. One bird says, scandalous. The other echoes, desperate. Are they talking about humans? Probably. Are they right? Almost certainly. Some clubs have formal competitions. You're handed a little handbill for next week's elocution charm exhibition. Categories include best use of sarcasm, Shakespearean drama, and most accurate impression of a footman. You make a mental note to attend. Etiquette books begin to emerge with entire chapters dedicated to parrot conduct in the parlor. Tips include: do not allow your bird to interrupt an error, even in jest. If your parrot mimics a sneeze, offer it a monogrammed kerchief. This is considered polite. Avoid teaching your bird political opinions unless you are prepared to defend them in mixed company. You begin to realize these gatherings aren't just about fun, they're performative. Strategic. In a society where everything is currency, fashion, lineage, conversation, a well-behaved parrot is social capital. One hostess glances at her parrot lovingly. He's never insulted a duchess. She says with pride, only a marquess. And she deserved it. You pass by a pair of gentlemen arguing over which species is most clever. The African grey. One says, unmatched mimicry. The other disagrees. Jacinthe Macos. Their comedic timing is superb. Their parrots squabble over a biscuit. You take a break near the window. Sipping something spiced and probably alcoholic. Outside, two boys wrestle over a book. Inside, a blue parrot hums a hunting folk tune you haven't heard in years. It pulls you inward, past the giggles and gossip, to something quieter. Something almost tender. And that's the twist, isn't it? Behind all the performance, there's affection. Real affection. These people might parade their parrots like princes, but many love them like family. There's the widow who claims her parrot still says, good morning, Edmund, even though her Edmund died 4 winters ago. Or the old naval officer whose parrot mimics cannon fire so precisely it once startled a dinner guest into a faint. That's not just novelty, that's memory. As the gathering winds down, the host offers cigars and sugar-red plumes. A lady in purple rises to announce next week's theme, historical speeches. Someone suggests training a parrot to recite Queen Elizabeth's Tilbury address. A man at the back mumbles, only if it doesn't bless you in the middle again. The room groans. And yet, till be back. Because for all their squawking, parrots offer a rare kind of joy in a rigid world. They're irreverent. They're chaotic. They don't care if your ruffles are crooked or your husband smells like cheese. They speak out of turn. They mock the guests. And they absolutely steal the last biscuit. And somehow, that makes them the most human thing in the room. As you prepare to leave, the hostess pats her parrot on the head. It leans forward and whispers something in her ear. She blushes. You don't ask. Better not to know. You step through the double doors of yet another London townhouse, this one darker, richer, and filled with furniture that seems to crack in disapproval as you pass. The air is scented with sandalwood and something vaguely medicinal. Welcome to a very different side of the parrot craze, the one where things get complicated. Your host tonight is Admiral Horace Bellwether, a man with 2 glass eyes and one living parrot named Brutus, who has seen far too much. Brutus sits on a perch in the study, overlooking a half-eaten bowl of walnuts and a scandalous amount of unfiled paperwork. It doesn't greet you. Stares, unblinking, menacing. You take a seat. Brutus, the Admiral says, polishing his buttons, remembers things, inconvenient things. The parrot hisses. Then, in a perfect falsetto, why were you in the linen closet? Margaret. Silence. One guest goes into their wine. This is not uncommon, as parrots spread across Georgian households. so too did their capacity to ruin lives. Mimicry. After all, has no filter. Parrots don't ask for context. They repeat what they hear, especially the juicy bits. And Georgian society? Positively dripping in juicy bits. You hear stories tonight, whispered over port and beneath fans. One parrot learned to mimic its mistress's private letters and began dictating them aloud to guests. Another ruined an engagement by blurting out, "I called you a cold pudding," in front of the bride's parents. The groom claimed it was a coincidence. The bird claimed nothing, except that it didn't lie. Historians still argue whether these incidents were genuine or exaggerated by society's gossips. But the evidence is suspiciously well documented. Some parrots even appeared in court. No, they weren't sworn in or perched on the witness stand with powdered wigs, but their words were cited in testimony. Particularly in divorce proceedings and inheritance squabbles. You flip through a court record lying open on a desk. In thick ink, the parrot did exclaim, "He's not your baby." Repeated L.A. to the great distress of all present. Below that, a note, "Judge was not a mused." In the drawing room, someone's parrot has just shouted, "You'll regret this, Rupert." Rupert turns a terrifying shade of lilac. Parrots don't lie, someone murmurs. But they do exaggerate. They mash up phrases. They repeat dreams as if they were facts. One poor housemaid was nearly dismissed after a parrot insisted she'd borrowed the silver spoon, when in fact she'd just said it once in a joke. The spoon was never missing. The tension? Still unresolved. You move to another home a few days later, this one belonging to a recently retired surgeon with a particular taste in birds. His parrot, a large African grey named Theophilus, is perched beside a glass case of antique medical tools. Scalpel. It mutters. Sutures. Oh dear. You don't stay in that room long. The surgeon, however, beams with pride. I mimicked my entire gallbladder lecture once. Took 42 minutes. Pauses. Frowns. Well, most of it. Some parts were embellished. Theophilus cheered. You call that sterile? He's not wrong. The deeper into the city salons you go, the more this bird tales grow. There's Lady Marjorie's parrot, who recites her late husband's will, though no one can confirm whether the bird's version includes a hidden fortune or just a fondness for overdramatic poses. There's the dowager countess whose parrot knows every servant's name, and their sins. She uses it to test new ears. If the bird stays silent, you're safe. If it shouts, you took the biscuits. Your tenure is over before it begins. And then there's the scandal of Lord Tillingham, whose parrot allegedly exposed an affair by mimicking the exact knock used by his mistress. The knock was followed by the phrase, "Your ladyship's not in," repeated with beating accuracy. You hear the story recounted 3 times, each version slightly wilder than the last. In one, the parrot testifies in court. In another, it's knighted for services to justice. In the third, it opens a bakery. Real or not, the damage was done. Even the etiquette guides start to adapt. A lady's companion to conversational birds advises. Avoid confidential topics within 6 feet of your parrot. If overheard, immediately say the opposite in hopes of confusing the bird. Teach your parrot polite nonsense phrases to repeat over scandalous ones. Tea and toast is particularly effective. And if all else fails, pretend it was the neighbor's bird. But the truly dangerous parrots? The ones who choose when to speak. You meet one. Eventually, a solemn-looking maca in a stately home where everything smells faintly of mildew and lemon polish. It sits quietly all afternoon. Then, just as you're leaving, it says, in a deep, amused voice, "He'll deny everything." You stop. Turn. The butler closes the door in your face. Georgian London is full of secrets. But parrots? They're terrible at keeping them. You're back in the drawing room again, but this one's darker, quieter, and smells faintly of laudanum and shoe polish. The owner is Dr. Percival Roth, a surgeon known for his collection of surgical instruments, unsettling paintings of flayed saints, and, most notably, his parrot, a crimson Amazon named Hector who interrupts human suffering with gleeful heckling. You're not sure if you're here for tea or for a consultation. Don't be SHY. Dr. Roth says, gesturing you toward an upholstered armchair with clawed feet and suspicious stains. Hector squawks from a perch overhead. Then announces, "Oh no, not again," with theatrical distress. It's not a great start. The doctor chuckles. He's been dramatic since the apothecary incident. You wisely don't ask. Hector flaps to the side table and begins tearing apart a copy of an inquiry into the causes of mortality. Paper scraps rain down like morbid confetti. Meanwhile, Dr. Roth explains that Hector has been through more operations than most medical students. He's heard it all, every bone snap, every protestation, every final breath, and he remembers. The bird nibbles a biscuit and says, "Next patient, please," in an unsettlingly cheerful voice. You try to smile. Historians still argue whether parrots like Hector really spent time in operating rooms, or if this is another exaggeration by an eccentric elite looking for amusement in morbidity. Both records from medical memoirs and journals suggest it wasn't entirely unheard of. Surgeons were often amateur naturalists, and keeping exotic animals, especially birds, was not only fashionable but intellectually fashionable. You scan the doctor's self, anatomical diagrams, preserved organs in jars, and one cage labeled Lancelot deceased. You don't ask about Lancelot either. Dr. Roth explains that Hector learned to mimic the groans of patients so precisely. In fact, that the local gravediggerons stopped by to check if someone had died. The parrot's party trick, moaning, is see the light, and then coughing dramatically. Unnerving? Certainly. Popular at dinner parties? Without question. You shift uncomfortably as Hector lands on the arm of your chair. He leans close and says, "You'll be alright, probably." Then winks. You soon learn Hector isn't unique. Across the city, parrots with medical credential, informal, of course, dot the homes of physicians and apothecaries. One doctor swears his parrot diagnosed jaundice in a patient by squawking, "You look like cheese." Another was said to have caught a maid faking illness when the parrot yelled. She was dancing last night, in front of her stunned employer. It's all deeply unsettling, and wildly entertaining. In Chelsea, you're invited to a surgical soiree, where attendees perform mock procedures with wooden tools on stuffed dummies. The guest of honor is, naturally, a parrot named Mr. Bones, who recites anatomical terms while perched atop a skull-shaped sugar sculpture. Scapula. Femur. You broke it, idiot. The laughter is uncomfortable and enthusiastic in equal measure. These parrots blur the line between comic relief and grim reminder. In a society where death is always at the door, plagues, fevers, consumption, duels, it's strangely comforting to have a loud, feathered narrator who mocks the inevitable. It's gallows humor in its pure st form. You spend an afternoon with a melancholic physician who claims his parrot, Prudence, recite Psalm 23 during funerals. She means well, says. Though once she inserted the phrase past the grave in verse 3. He hasn't taken her to a burial since. Some patients, however, adore these birds. One elderly widow swears that her late husband's parrot saved her from despair. He says their pet just like Edward used to. She sighs. And also where's my blooming soup? Which he can't stand. But it helps. She chuckles softly. The parrot replies, "Where's my blooming soup? You leave them in peace." Then there's the story of the bird who outlived not one, not two, but three owners. The current family, somewhat nervously, refer to him as the heirloom. He's older than most of their furniture. His name is Erasmus. He calls the housekeeper Dogface. Um's funeral marches on rainy days, and claims to have once met the king. No one doubts him. You hear a rumor of a parrot in Edinburgh who mimics the voice of its first owner, a doctor long dead, and regularly frightens house guests by shouting, "Scalpel, nurse," in a ghostly brogue. A wax? Maybe. But you still walk a little faster past that part of town. By now, you've seen dozens of parrots. But none quite like Hector. He's not elegant. He's not affectionate. He's not even well behaved. But he's got presence. A certain dramatic timing. The way he mutters, "You'll need a bigger saw," as you pass the umbrella stand is either genius or deeply inappropriate. Possibly both. Dr. Roth insists Hector is an asset to his practice. Patients are more honest when he's in the room. He claims. They confess things. Secrets. Sometimes sins. He leans back in his chair. They think he won't tell. Hector says, "Oops. You leave the house feeling vaguely judged, slightly haunted, and wholly impressed." The parrots of Georgian London aren't just playthings or decorations. They're strange archivists. Tiny, feathered historians cataloging the absurd, the tragic, and the highly inappropriate, one squawk at a time. And as the sun sets over smoky rooftops, you find yourself wondering how many secrets these birds hold. How many whispered confessions, late-night arguments, and final farewells have been preserved in their uncanny mimicry? One day, perhaps, till tell. Just, not today. You're perched once again in polite society, this time at a lace-draped tea table in a townhouse that smells of bergamot, beeswax polish, and something faintly alarming, you suspect it's whatever's under the parrot's perch. You've been invited by Lady Venetia Trumbull, self-declared arbiter of manners, fashion, and avian civility. Yes, civility. Because tonight's topic is one of mounting concern in Georgian circles, parrot etiquette. It was bound to happen. When enough parrots start calling bishops, putting face, or repeating a duchess's wine-soaked confession at high tea, society draws a line, a slightly trembling, perfumed line. Lady Venetia, corseted within an inch of her sanity and armed with a lorgnette, opens her well-worn copy of the Modern Guide to Domesticated Discourse. We must, she announces, establish standards, even for birds. Her parrot, a disturbingly self-satisfied African grey named Horace, responds by singing, "Oh, not this again." Etiquette books have, by now, started including entire sections on parrot management, though opinions differ wildly. One pamphlet, Feather Decorum, suggests teaching your parrot neutral phrases like, "How charming," or, "Indeed, madam." Another takes a harsher stance, if your bird interrupts a conversation, you must gently bow your head and excuse yourself, not the bird. Yes, society has accepted that the bird is blameless. You nibble a scone while Horace delivers a running commentary on the pastries. Dry, overworked, better last Tuesday. He's not wrong. One guest mutters. At least I didn't say it tasted like mothballs this time. Lady Venetia glares at him. He's working on kindness, she says, as if Horace is attending finishing school. You begin to notice that everyone here speaks in slightly hushed tones. Even to each other. They're not worried about offending you. They're worried about Horace's memory. More than one scandal has, apparently, started with a bird reciting private conversations that were never meant to leave the breakfast nook. And this is the paradox of the Georgian parrot, so adored, yet so feared, like a house guest who knows where the family silver is hidden and what was whispered in the drawing room at midnight. You lean over to one guest, a fidgety man with trembling hands. Confides. My bird knows my mother-in-law's snore. She visits. Does the impression. Loudly. I've had to fake bronchitis just to drown him out. A footman appears with a tray of elderflower cordial, and a lime green parakeet on the windowsill squeals. Watch your elbows. Jeffrey. Jeffrey flinches. The tray wobbles. The parrot chirres mugly. The room nods in approval. Some hosts take drastic steps to preserve order. You hear of one family who built a parrot room, a sunlight conservatory where birds could chatter safely out of earshot from guests. Another aristocrat simply draped a heavy curtain over his bird cage during social visits, like censoring a painting that had opinions. Historians still debate whether these trends were widespread or limited to the absurd elite. But several surviving etiquette manuals from the late 1700s include advice on managing parrot indiscretion. Suggesting the problem was significant enough to warrant official comment. You're shown one such guide, Conduct for the Feather Deflustered Household, published in 1791. Gems include, if your parrot mimics flatulence, claim it's quoting a satire. For birds inclined to shout names, provide them with a false roster. Never allow a parrot to attend confession, even from outside the window. Of course, parrots don't follow rules. They improvise. A socialite named Miss Calpurnia Finch taught her bird to say, "You look radiant." Unfortunately, it used the phrase exclusively on men with bald spots. One such gentleman fainted with joy. His wife filed a complaint. The parrot was temporarily banned from garden parties. You take tea with another hostess who trained her bird to yawn loudly when bored. The parrot now does so every time the Bishop of Kensington speaks. She claims it's coincidence. No one believes her. Not even the bishop. Politeness, in Georgian London, is everything. You must wear the right glove, kiss the right hand, sip from the correct side of the cup. And yet, every parlor is now infiltrated by birds that couldn't care less. They flirt, they bitch, they make your perfume and quote your diary. And because they're birds, well-dressed, exotic, expensive birds, you can't do a thing about it. Some have tried. A scandalous story floats about a gentleman who tried to discipline his parrot by feeding it nothing but porridge. The parrot responded by shouting, Doll, doll, every time the gentleman opened his mouth. The gentleman eventually moved to bath. The parrot, apparently, now lives in Kensington and throws crackers at horses. There's even a brief fashion for virtue training, where parrots are taught to say things like patience, forgiveness, or turn the other cheek. But it rarely works. One bird took to shouting, forgive him, right after someone dropped a porcelain saucer. It made every broken plate feel like a minor moral failing. And yet, despite the social chaos, no one is giving up their birds. The parrots are chaos wrapped in feathers, but pure entertaining chaos. Unfiltered honesty in an age of powdered perfection. They offer what few guests dare, truth. Or at least, something very close to it. Lady Venetia lifts her teacup and dabs her lips. Horace may be impolite, she says, but he's never boring. Horace, without missing a beat, squawks. Unlike Reginald, the room gasps. Reginald frowns. You excuse yourself, just as Horace begins humming a tune suspiciously similar to a Baudit tavern song. No one stops him, because, deep down, they know, the moment Parrot stops quacking, society will have far less to talk about. You're peering through a crack in a gilded door. Somewhere near the edge of London's polite society, where drawing rooms darken into secrets. And gossip becomes currency. This is no ordinary home. It belongs to Miss Letitia Bramley, a woman with scandals stitched into her hemline and a parrot trained for espionage. Yes, espionage. Tonight, you're here to witness something whispered about in salons and scribbled in the margins of scandal sheets, the Maca Mistress mystery. Letitia is draped in violet silk and smirking like someone who knows too much. On her shoulder, a ruby red Maca with eyes that follow every movement, every glance, every sigh. His name is Diesel, and he's not just here to squawk. He's here to deliver letters. Specifically, letters laced with perfume and rumor, often folded into tiny scrolls and tied to his leg with silk ribbon. In an age where postboys are nosy and servants gossip, Diesel is the perfect private courier. Flies from window to window, perch to perch, scandal to scandal, unreadable to anyone but his mistress, and perhaps the man across the square. Historians still argue whether Diesel was a real bird or a composite myth stitched together from society's need for melodrama. But several anonymous poems from the time reference the bird who bore a broken bow. And at least one satirical pamphlet pictures a parrot dropping a letter directly into the hands of a blushing curate. The most infamous tale is this. Letitia had a suitor, a rather too handsome barrister named Silas Gray. He was clever, confident, and utterly untrustworthy. Letitia, ever the strategist, trained Diesel to deliver notes containing bits of affection, poetry, and the occasional veiled threat. Things escalated quickly. One evening, Diesel was seen fluttering through the rain, soaked but determined, carrying a note that reportedly read, "If you dine with Lady Merriweather again, I will teach Diesel to recite your debts in rhyme." Silas didn't dine with Lady Merriweather again. You're seated in Letitia's parlor, sipping lukewarm tea while Diesel passes the curtain rod above. Letitia waves a hand toward a cabinet stacked with love letters, all delivered and retrieved by Diesel. He's more reliable than a valet, she says, and less likely to flirt with the laundress. You glance up. Diesel glares at you. The letters weren't always romantic. Some were coded reports on the behavior of rival debutantes. One, according to legend, included a sketch of an Earl's bald spot, labeled evidence. Another supposedly contained a map of a secret trysting spot, later published in a rather scandalous short novel. It wasn't long before other ladies tried to copy the tactic. The problem? Not every parrot was as cooperative. One unfortunate girl trained her bird to carry a note to her lover, only for the parrot to stop halfway, recite the contents in front of a clergyman, and then fly home. She was exiled to the countryside by noon. Diesel, however, never betrayed a secret, or at least, not until the infamous Masquerade Ball of 1792. Picture this: glittering chandeliers, masked faces, champagne fountains shaped like swans. Letitia arrives in crimson satin. Diesel perched proudly on her wrist. Across the ballroom, Silas Gray appears, arm in arm with Lady Merriweather. A miscalculation, a betrayal, a moment of poetic vengeance. Letitia lifts Diesel, whispers something into his feathers, and releases him. Flutters high above the dancers, lands on Silas's shoulder, and recites, loudly, clearly, And with dramatic flair, a string of rhyming couplets so scandalous that 3 dog-waggers fainted and someone dropped an entire trifle. The refrain? Your depths are tall, your morals thin, your teeth are false, your hair's not in. Letitia curtsies. The orchestra never recovered. After that, Diesel became legend. Some claim Derreti read to the countryside. Others say Letitia taught him French and used him to embarrass foreign dignitaries. A few insist still lives, very old, very pampered, and very pleased with himself, hidden in the attic of some quiet estate. Muttering secrets in his sleep. You watch now as Diesel picks up a tiny scroll from Letitia's glove box. Attaches it to his leg. And hops to the open window. Glances at you, squawks. Your wig is askew. Then takes off. Letitia smiles. He's never wrong. The window shuts behind him. Of course. The idea of parrots as messengers outlasted the practice. Parrot post never caught on widely, it was expensive, unpredictable, and subject to theft by jealous cats. But the fantasy? Oh, it endured. You pass a group of girls in Hyde Park reciting Diesel's couplets from memory. Once trained her cockatoo to carry folded notes between benches. The bird mostly delivers them to the wrong people. It's chaos. It's beautiful. Pamphlets even popped up offering parrot courier services. Boasting, utter discretion, unless bribed with biscuit. Most were jokes. But at least one wealthy widow employed a team of parrots to distribute invitations to her salons, until one of them invited her ex-husband by accident. The widow fired the entire aviary. Still, the macabre mistress left her mark. Today, Letitia and Diesel are featured in at least 2 romantic ballads, 1 tragic play, and a novelty biscuit tin design sold in Soho. You can still find fans printed with Diesel's silhouette. The best ones squawk when unfolded. And as you leave Letitia's house, your head spinning with wine, wit, and rhyming accusations, you realize the parrot isn't just a pet anymore. It's an accomplice, a co-conspirator, a fluttering force of nature in a city obsessed with secrets. Some send ravens, some use carrier pigeons. But in Georgian London, the truly bold send parrots. You're standing outside a stone courthouse in the rain, watching a very proper barrister argue with a parrot. The parrot is winning. Inside, a small crowd has gathered, part legal audience, part gawkers, part parrot enthusiasts, because today is something quite rare. Even by Georgian standards, a trial where the central piece of evidence is a bird. His name is Claudius. He's a sulfur-crested cockatoo. And he's perched calmly on a gentleman's walking stick beside the witness stand. Nibbling a button and occasionally squawking, liar, liar, at deeply inconvenient moments. The case, a dispute over inheritance. 2 cousins each claimed that the recently deceased Lady Tilling had promised them the same property. Unfortunately, Lady Tilling is no longer available to comment. But Claudius, might be, belonged to her, and according to both parties, he's been repeating her final wishes, for better or worse. You sit in the gallery as the clerk reads aloud, in the matter of Hargrave versus Hargrave. We will hear evidence from the bird. Now, historians still argue whether any parrot actually testified in court, or whether these cases were exaggerated in legal gossip and satirical prints. Both records do exist of parrots being mentioned in testimony, and in at least one case, heavily influencing the outcome. Was it law? No. But was it persuasive? Very much so. Claudius is presented to the court with all due ceremony. Immediately squawks. Give it to Jasper. Give it to Jasper. Jasper beams. His cousin Wilfred turns the color of boiled ham. The judge, trying not to smile, asks the keeper whether the bird has repeated this phrase often. Only 300 times, Your Honor. The man replies. Claudius adds, not Wilfred. Never Wilfred. There's audible snickering from the gallery. You glance around. The atmosphere is half courtroom, half theater. Georgian society loves a good spectacle. And today's proceedings are everything they've hoped for: scandal, feathers, and passive-aggressive inheritance drama. Legal scholars begin debating, can mimicry count as testimony? Is it merely coincidence that Claudius learned those phrases? Or was in fact, echoing the private will of the departed? Claudius offers his own view. She said it. He heard it. Then added, where's my biscuit? You tight-fisted turnip? No one knows who that's aimed at. The courtroom breaks for lunch. Outside, pamphlets are already being printed. A cockatoo in the courtroom, and the bird who spoke the will. Satirists sketch Claudius in a wig. Children chant his catchphrases in the street. When proceedings resume, the judge delivers a carefully worded ruling. The parrot is not a witness in the legal sense, but may have provided meaningful insight into the character and probable intentions of the deceased. In short, Jasper wins. Wilfred storms out. Claudius screams, "So long, soccer RRR." You learn this wasn't an isolated incident. Elsewhere in London, a parrot owns a complicated a burglary case. The bird belonged to a pawnbroker whose shop was robbed at midnight. The next morning, the parrot greeted police by cheerfully repeating, "Don't touch that." Harold. Guess what the suspect's name was? Harold denied everything. The parrot shrieked, "Put it in the sack." Followed by, "Run faster. You fool." He was convicted. Some say it was circumstantial. Others believe the parrot was more reliable than half the witnesses. Of course, not everyone trusted the birds. One pamphlet called them chaotic echoes of vice. Another warned that relying on parrots for truth is like trusting your mirror to flatter you. And then there was the preacher who claimed parrots were agents of divine judgment, little feathery recording devices sent to expose hypocrisy. But none of that stopped society from listening. You walk through a solicitor's office, where a parrot perches on a high shelf above the law books. Muttering, "Objection. Sustained. Sit down." Horace. The clerk's client learned the entire courtroom script from a 6-week inheritance dispute. Now, when anyone raises their voice, it yells, "Silence in the court," and flaps dramatically. They use it to train interns. You pause at a tavern later that evening, where a fire crackles, ale flows, and a green parrot perches on the bar, telling the story of Claudius to a rapt audience, badly, and with many invented details. He also beat the judge. It insists. That didn't happen. Probably. It's clear now, parrots aren't just pets. They're part of the legal and moral theater of Georgian life. They remember things, repeat things, expose things. They are unpredictable archivists, sometimes comic, sometimes cruel, but never neutral. Back in the drawing room of your rented quarters. A friend asks, "Do you think Claudius knew what he was saying?" You shrug. Hard to say. But you remember the look on Jasper's face when the bird said his name. The stunned hush. The possibility, however absurd, that maybe, just maybe, a parrot could carry someone's dying wish. Or maybe Claudius just liked him more. Either way, it worked. And in Georgian London, where the truth is slippery and the scandal always bubbling, sometimes a bird really does get the last word. You're squeezing through the narrow alleyways of Wapping now, where the Thames air tastes like damp rope and rumors. Gone are the perfumed parlors and velvet cushions of Mayfair. This is the docks. And parrots, they're still here, just differently feathered. A customs officer in a frayed red coat waves you into a warehouse where crates are stacked like drunken pyramids. Somewhere between the barrels of rum and bales of sugar. You hear it, not the face. Not the face. You freeze. A sailor shrugs. That's Percy. He bites. Percy is a blue and gold macaque currently perched on the edge of a crate marked salted cod, St. Kitts. He stares at you with all the cold judgment of a retired magistrate. On the floor beside him, a customs agent is swatting at paperwork while muttering. "Third parrot today. Welcome to the murky world of parrot smuggling. The tropical bird trade is booming, and not just through proper licensed dealers. Oh no, while wealthy collectors parade their parrots at tea parties. Down here on the docks, smugglers are shoving them into cold knapsacks, coffee sacks, even hollowed-out barrels of lemons. Why? Because demand has exploded, and the profit margins are, pardon the pun, bird-brained huge. One merchant you meet confesses he owns two lovebirds inside his wig. Never again, he says, scratching at a mysterious bald patch. They argued the whole time. Historians still debate how widespread the smuggling operations were. Both port logs, court records, and diary entries all suggest that London's parrot population exceeded its official import tallies by a lot. And the most suspicious birds? Always the ones that show up speaking fluent Spanish, quoting Latin, or imitating ship bells on land. You follow an inspector named Booth as he opens a crate labeled candles. Inside, beeswax. Also, a green parrot who screeches. He hates this box, and then bites his hand. Booth doesn't flinch. Better than last week. One yelled "dog shoot" and made a child cry. He's not the only one dealing with them. Some of the smugglers are former sailors who now specialize in exotic birds. Others are opportunistic vendors who think a talking parrot might sweeten the deal when hawking stolen pineapples. But a few are what the inspector calls bird pirates. You meet one such man in a waterfront pub, where the sawdust floor is soaked in beer and secrets. His name is Felix Feather Dalton. No one knows if that's his real name. But his waistcoat is stitched with tiny embroidered parrots. And his companion, a sleek African grey, keeps whispering, "Hide the silver." Feather leans in close. "There's a trick," he says. "Train the bird to act dim at the dock. Just stare. Squawk nonsense. Then, on say you're through, they start spouting poetry." He cackles. "Customs can't arrest a sonnet. Not officially." Back at the warehouse, you see a different tactic, bravery. A man attempts to pass off his parrot as a pigeon, feathers died. Boy silenced. It works. Almost. Until the bird clears its throat and says, "You'll regret that waistcoat, Gerald." Gerald, the customs officer, doesn't like being called out by name. Then there are the parrots who want to get caught. One green Amazon reportedly blew the whistle on its smuggler by shouting, "This man has oranges in his pants." Oranges were taxed. The smuggler was fined. The parrot, adopted by the customs team and renamed Tarif. Tarif now sits on a special perch at the inspection station, where he mocks contraband with lines like, "That's a funny looking fish." And, "Is this cheese? Or soap?" You're introduced to a ledger where Booth keeps a list of notable avian incidents. Among the highlights, a parrot who screamed, "Contraband," every time a woman walked by in a feathered hat. One who sang sea shanties that detailed its own smuggling route. A former clergyman's bird who confessed, unprovoked. 2, 3 false invoices and a regrettable tries in Martinique. The system adapt. Inspectors begin hearing bird handlers to detect illegal accents. Parrots who quote Voltaire or mention opium tend to raise red flags. One officer tells you, if it says ejeyo, darling with a French inflection, it's either smuggled or very well traveled. There are even rumors, half joking, half serious, of a secret society of parrots being trained as surveillance tools by foreign powers. One pamphlet, published anonymously, warns of avian spies in RT rooms. It's probably satire. Probably. You spend an afternoon on the docks watching a shipment from Barbados get unpacked. Most of it is sugar and rum. But tucked in a crate marked buttons, you find 3 tiny green parrots staked like mismatched socks. One mutters, "You'll never take me alive." Another caws. The third, perfectly silent. Inspector Booth raises an eyebrow. Those quiet ones are the most dangerous. At the edge of the harbor, you spot a parrot in a small wooden cage, tied to a child's cart. The cart's owner, a freckled boy, swears it's his pet. The bird blinks, then says, 50 shillings and it's yours. The boy flees. Smuggling parrots isn't just a crime, it's an ecosystem. Buyers, fakers, trainers, scouts, birds that have changed hands so many times they quote lullabies in 3 languages and mimic a sneeze they heard in Lisbon. And through it all, one thing is constant, the parrots know more than they let on. As you head home, the sunset paints the river gold. Somewhere in the alley behind you, a parrot squawks. You saw nothing. You walk faster. You find yourself somewhere quite grand today, tall hedges, fountains shaped like mythological beasts, and so much marble it's almost suspicious. This is Buckingham House, not yet a palace in name, but certainly in pomp, and inside, a royal aviary, where the parrots are just as opinionated as the courtiers. You're here to witness how the feathered craze has crept all the way to the monarchy. Yes, even royalty has fallen under the spell of parrots. A footman leads you through a gallery painted with portraits of noble ancestors, most of whom look faintly judgmental, and then into a light-filled conservatory, where the air smells of citrus trees, polished wood, and a faint undertone of droppings no one wants to acknowledge. There, on a silk-draped perch, sits Lord Fluffington, an African grey belonging to Queen Charlotte. He is, as far as birds go, deeply unimpressed by your presence. He blinks, then says, "Is that what you're wearing?" The footman flinches. He gets that from Her Majesty. You nod solemnly. Of course he does. You've heard whispers of the King's collection before. George III, known for his eccentricities and interests ranging from farming to astronomy, kept an assortment of birds at Kew Palace, including a parrot who, according to persistent rumor, interrupted a diplomatic reception by emitting a noise so impolite it was only ever described as prolonged and intestinal. Historians still argue whether that tale is true. Some say it was a parrot. Others insist it was a bored earl. But the result was the same, the Danish ambassador's monocle fell into his soup. And diplomatic relations suffered briefly. You walk slowly through the aviary. The cages are lavish, carved walnut, gold leaf, tiny velvet hammocks. One cockatoo swings gently from a jeweled hoop and murmurs, "Long live the king," followed by, "Where's my tea?" in an uncanny imitation of a chambermaid. Royal parrots aren't just for show. They're trained, polished, and, as you soon learn, endlessly competitive. You pass a display of medals, yes. Medals, awarded to birds who have successfully greeted foreign dignitaries in multiple languages. One plaque reads, "To Her Highness Plume. For services in Latin and Italian." The parrot in question, a green Amazon who says, "Salve, idiota," with alarming clarity. You sit beside a gentleman named Sir Edgar Beltry, an equerry who looks like he hasn't slept since the last coronation. He's in charge of the Royal Menagerie's behavioral program. "They're not pets," says gravely. "They're assets. Diplomatic tools." You raise an eyebrow. "Not all heads of state enjoy dogs," explains. "But a talking bird? That's charm. That's novelty. That's soft power." Apparently, it worked. One French envoy reportedly returned home charmed by a cockatoo who shouted, "Liberté," at just the right moment. The king had no idea. Of course, the bird had been copying the footman. In another case, an American visitor asked if the parrot could say, "Freedom." The bird said, "More pudding." It was declared symbolic of British excess. Back in the conservatory, you witness a training session. A parrot named Clarence is being coaxed into saying, "A pleasure, Your Grace." So far, he's only managed, a pest, "Your face," which might still be useful in the right context. The trainer sighs, has opinions. Clarence squawks, "No more Latin." Then sings part of Rule Britannia. Some of the birds take on court roles. Unofficially, of course, one green parrot perches near the Queen's music room and whistles along two sonatas. Adding the occasional encore, or too slow, depending on mood. Musicians find this both helpful and devastating. Then there's Matilda, a crimson parrot who allegedly exposed an affair between a lady in waiting and a naval captain by Screechinag. "Kiss me, sailor," whenever entered the room. The Queen had her moved to the garden. You hear stories of birds being gifted between royal houses. A Prussian prince once sent a violet macaw that spoke 3 languages and barked like a Pomeranian. It terrified the palace dogs. They wouldn't go near the library for weeks. In exchange, King George offered a lute-playing monkey. It did not go well. The parrot was missed. At one point, a plan was proposed, half joking, half serious, to include parrots in formal court processions. The idea was that they'd sit on velvet poles beside heralds, reciting titles of nobility as the lords passed. The idea was shelved after a rehearsal in which a parrot repeated the elegy called a baron, Lord Boring. He was not a mused. Still, the court is full of parrot lore. One former lady-in-waiting recounts how a parrot memorized the entire family tree of the royal household and would correct visitors when they confused names or titles. "No, that's her cousin," it would say. "Try again." Another tells of a parrot who cried, "Treason," every time a certain duke entered the room. The duke moved to the countryside. You stroll past a cage marked Sir Percy. The bird inside eyes you warily. Then says, "You again? You've never met, but seems sure." Before leaving, you pause at the grand aviary doors, where an elderly parrot with a crooked wing mutters, "God save the king, and God save my nerves." You feel that, deeply. As you step back into the hallway of mirrors and footfalls, you realize something important. Parrots aren't just part of the household, they're part of power. Their words echo in the ears of monarchs, ministers, musicians. They charm, they shame, they entertain and inform. They are, in every sense, the court jesters of feathers and wit. And sometimes, just sometimes, they fart in front of foreign dignitaries. You're in a drawing room that smells of lavender and dust, with faded wallpaper and ticking clocks. Everything feels quieter. The candles flicker lower. The voices more reserved. The parrots, still talking, but slower now. Less chic, more echo. This is the tail end of the craze. The sun is setting on Georgian London's great parrot obsession. It didn't happen all at once. Fashions never crash, they erode. The bright feathers and high-pitched mimicry that once dazzled have begun to feel, well, a little much. There's a new elegance rising. One that favors control, restraint, and dogs in velvet collars. Yes, the pocket dog has entered the chat. You first notice it in the way the parrot perches are pushed to corners. Their silk coverings pulled down more often. The birds still mutter, still say, scandal, and, pass the mustard, but now it's in the shadows. Their spotlight as dimmed. You're visiting a baronet's home in Bloomsbury. Once a grand parrot salon. It now hosts solemn pianoforte recitals and whippet races. A lonesome Amazon parrot in the hallway greets you with a half-hearted welcome, maybe, before returning to chewing on a tassel. It's a little heartbreaking when you ask the baronet where the other parrots went. Shrugs. Too loud, too lively. The Duchess prefers lapdogs. Says it like an apology. His wife's Pekingese yaps at the parrot. The parrot sighs. Yap yap yap. Very original. It's not just about noise. The cultural winds are shifting. The age of enlightenment is leaning toward science. Classification. Order. Exotic birds are reclassified from fashion accessories to natural curiosities. Tier moved from salons to menageries. From parlors to the pages of taxonomic books. Historians still debate what caused the decline. Was it the changing tastes of amateuring empire? Was it the sheer saturation, too many parrots? Too many accidents? Too many whispered scandals echoed at the wrong dinner party? Or was it simply the rise of new distractions, books, music, political pamphlets, promenading with well-behaved spaniels? Probably all of it. You flip through a satirical pamphlet titled The Squawk is Dead, showing a macaw being replaced on a perch by a smug-looking pug. The parrot protests, at least I had conversation. The pug replies, imagine the furniture. Some parrots were sent to country estates, gifted to cousins, or returned to the dealers they came from. Others simply stayed, silent, sullen, mouthing lines from conversations no one remembers anymore. You meet one such bird, a blue eclectus named Bellamy, kept in a dusty alcove beneath a staircase. Still here, says softly, as if surprised to find himself. Repeats a toast from 20 years ago. No one lifts a glass. Parrots, once prized for their ability to surprise, became risky in a society turning inward. As politics grew more charged and propriety more brittle, an ultimate squawk could ruin a family faster than a misstep at court. And parrots, as history has proven, always squawk at the wrong moment. There are attempts to revive the trend. A few eccentric collectors try staging avian salons, but they're seen as passé. One hostess is laughed at when her parrot yells, more butter. During a poetry reading, the guests never return. Parrots fade from caricature to cautionary tale. You visit a bookbinder who remembers the craze with wistful fondness. They were bold little mirrors. Essays, stroking a parrot-shaped paperweight, showed us who we were. Didn't care if we liked it. Hasn't owned a bird in years. Gestures to the paperweight. This one doesn't argue. Even the ticket books changed tone. Earlier editions offer tips for training and disciplining parrots, later ones omit birds entirely. As though embarrassed they were ever fashionable. A single footnote in a 1799 edition of The Polite Home reads, if one must keep a parrot, ensure it is out of earshot. You walk past a shop window filled with porcelain dogs. In the corner, behind the terriers and spaniels, a single parrot figurine peeks out. Its beak is shut. Still, not all birds vanished. In some quiet homes, parrots became part of the furniture, quieter, older, but still very much alive. They became relics of a louder time. Some even turned into family legends. Belonged to my grandmother. One gentleman tells you, pointing to a green parrot in a sunlight kitchen. Still calls me Charles. My name is Edward. The parrot shrugs. Charles was funnier. You attend one last dinner party before leaving London. It's understated, gentle. The talk is of politics, music, and travel. A grey parrot rests on a windowsill. Eyes half closed, feathers a little dull. When the room falls silent, says softly, remember the pineapples? No one answers, but a few guests smile. The laughter is smaller now, but still warm. As you walk through London's gaslit streets that night, you realize the parrots aren't gone. Not really. Tear echoes now, in jokes, in family stories, in the margins of old letters and the faded memory of chaos in powder-pink parlors. And somewhere, surely, one is still saying, where's my biscuit? You return, years later, to a part of London most have forgotten, a narrow cobbled street behind a shuttered haberdashery. The kind where the air tastes of paper and rain. There's a house here, once grand, now sagging with the quiet weight of time. Its windows are filmed with age. Its curtains haven't moved in a decade. But something inside stirs. The caretaker lets you in with a creaky key and a warning, mind the third stair. And don't talk to the bird unless it talks first. You raise an eyebrow. It shrugs. It doesn't like to be rushed. You climb to the attic. The dust up here is thick enough to sketch in. Faded wallpaper peels like old lace. And broken furniture lands like it's eavesdropping. You're not alone. There, in a shadowed corner, sits an old parrot cage, tarnished brass, bent wires, and a velvet cover drawn halfway. And inside, a parrot, silent, still, watching. His feathers are dulled with age. The 11 vivid greens and reds faded to twilight west. One claw clutches the perch. The other trembles now and then. You step closer. A floorboard groans. The parrot blinks. Then says, in a voice cracked with time, "Where you been?" You freeze. Then laugh. Of course. His name, you learn, is Archibald. He belonged to a lady named Beatrice. Once the toast of town. She's gone now, 30 years. Give or take, but Archibald remains. And he remembers everything. He mutters phrases like a half-forgotten play, "Put the corset down. Gregory. More lemons. More lace. Not that cousin, the other one." His voice shifts with each memory. Sliding through impersonations of guests who haven't set foot here since the year Napoleon became a punchline. You sit by the window. He talks. He tells you about the night a violinist passed out in the pudding. About the man who proposed with a pineapple. About the time someone mistook him for a centerpiece and tried to eat a feather. He chuckles at that one. You ask questions. He answers some. Others. He lets hang in the air like forgotten perfume. He sighs. Letitia never forgave him. Who? He doesn't say. And then, softly, he recites. To be loved. To be caged. To be fed crumbs and secrets. To remember when they forget. He pauses. That was mine. You believe him. The room darkens as evening settles in. Outside, the city buzz with new fashions. New chatter. But up here, in this attic, time folds in on itself. Archibald yawns. You ask if he wants anything. A biscuit. He says. Or scandal. Either though. He begins to doze. Feathers puffed like the ghosts of old wigs. You sit quietly, listening to the soft whiz of his breath and the distant patter of London rain. And in that stillness, you understand. The parrot craze wasn't about fashion. Not really. It was about company. A voice that never left. A witness to the everyday dramas no one else noticed. The tiny, talking archivists of who we were when we weren't pretending. Archibald shifts in his sleep. Scandalous. He mumbles. You close the curtain gently. Let him rest. Word count, 1083. Wind down, 300 words. Now, take a moment to let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. Breathe in slowly, then exhale. Like the final flicker of a candle being pinched out. We've wandered far tonight, haven't we? From powdered salons to whispering alleyways. From the royal halls of Buckingham House to the attic where Archibald dreams in feathers and fading light. You've seen parrots interrupt proposals, ruin lawsuits, quote Shakespeare, and deliver threats wrapped in lace. You've heard their voices, sometimes funny, sometimes unsettling, sometimes heartbreakingly honest. You've walked Georgian London in slippers of memory, trailing laughter and biscuit crumbs. And now, with the rain settling in gentle patterns on the roof of the world, and you're breathing slow and easy, you can let it all go. The candles have burned down. The parrot perches are still. Somewhere, deep in the quiet of a city that no longer exists, a bird hums the chorus of a tune no one remembers. Except you. Sleep comes gently now, like a silk curtain drawn over a cage. Like a whispered scandal tucked behind a fan. Like a feather drifting to the floor with no rush to land. You've nothing left to do. Just rest.